Further debate. Member from Oshawa.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I am very pleased to be able to join this debate on Bill 251, which is the Combating Human Trafficking Act 2021. Speaker, I've had the opportunity many times to stand in this legislature, and
order, please.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I want to be focused on this issue because I have been for a long time. And it is very personal to many of us in our communities on both sides of the House. But we're here talking about human trafficking with a bill before us that outlines some changes. We've been having that debate. What I wanted to do today, and I'll really get into it in a moment, is I want to present the bones of a human trafficking model as laid out by in Durham region by the Human Trafficking Coalition, by the folks at Victim Services of Durham region, and it is a massive document, and I want to get some of those pieces on the record. But before I do, I want to take this opportunity and connect with the folks at home that are starting to learn about this as an issue. Unfortunately, when parents learn about this issue, it's because there's a police officer at their door, or they are starting to maybe hear about it through their children's friends who might have the nerve to flag it for their friends' parents. This is something that is, as we've heard, it's heinous. It is a scourge across communities. I'm going to stay focused on human trafficking in the sex trafficking realm, although I'd love for us to have a conversation around labour trafficking in Ontario and Canada, but I'm going to stay in this lane today. Human trafficking is a heinous crime. It seeks to destroy the lives of its targets. It looks for vulnerabilities. It is a predatory crime, and it seeks to destroy, literally break down the confidence, all of the support networks, and destroy a human for exploitative reasons to make money. You think about guns and drugs and human trafficking, and that's not in that order necessarily, and it depends on the parts of the province, but we've talked about how Ontario has a terrible reputation. It's not a reputation, has the terrible honour, I don't have the right word, of being the worst in the country. East Coast is also problematic, but when you look at Ontario, it's been identified as one of the major hubs of human trafficking in Canada, and major hubs within the province are Thunder Bay, the far north, Windsor, Ottawa, and the GTA. 2014 research from Persons Against the Crime of Trafficking in Humans found that Indigenous women and girls are most likely to be victims of trafficking because they are, quote, disproportionately affected by poverty, racism, and marginalization, leaving them increasingly vulnerable, end quote. There are strong links between sex trafficking and child welfare involvement. Indigenous youth are overrepresented in child welfare systems, increasing their vulnerability, and as we've heard, where you have vulnerable people, you have potential targets. To the thoughtful comments that I had heard earlier from my colleagues around prevention, we need to see more preventative measures. It is very important to prosecute appropriately and effectively. It is very important to support victims, but it is also important and cannot be left out to prevent their being victims. I am going to start from a partisan place, and we've heard this is not a partisan issue. That's where I'm going to start. It will not be where I end. But I am going to say that since the election, this government, which we've heard today, is on side with this being a priority issue and is seeking to make improvements, which we applaud. Denied funding for sexual assault centres while demand for services continued to rise. They disbanded the expert panel aimed to end violence against women. So the earlier questions of will the government reverse that now that they see how it's interconnected, I hope they will. That they cancelled the Compensation for Victims of Crime Act, creating more barriers for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, limited access to contraceptives and reproductive health, and finally removed provisions that allowed domestic and sexual violence survivors leave from work, and called that bill a job killer. So I'm saying that at the beginning to say we have so much more to improve and fix, okay? Because I do take the government at their word on this issue. I have seen members over there through the years when they were on opposition benches. We have worked together on this issue. But we got a long way to go. So I want to speak about what I know, and that is local to Durham region, but I think that much of it can be extrapolated across the province. The referrals received by Victim Services of Durham region for human trafficking have doubled annually for the past 3 years. Domestic sex trafficking survivors are over 90% female, but we do know that that is partially due to males being highly unlikely to disclose because of additional stigma associated with male victimization. The average age of recruitment, as we have heard, is now at age 13. In 2020, it was 14. That, as we have seen, online luring and exploitation as a result of the pandemic is astronomical. It's terrifying. Unfortunately, what's being reported to Victim Services is that there's an increase in brutality, that the torment and the torture and the brutality of those victims, as we're seeing businesses closing, businesses like massage parlors, for example, and now they're being pushed into isolation in motels. And I thought that during the pandemic, that the hotels and the motels, that may have slowed. And the police have made it very clear to me it has not, that has not slowed. The Human Trafficking Unit in Durham region is remarkable. And I want to take the opportunity and thank them and applaud the work that they are doing, and they are doing it right across the street from me. My office is right across from the police station. I can wave to them, they can wave to me. You know, and I have been on a ride along with the Human Trafficking Unit. I have spoken at length about that experience in this House, and I'm not going to revisit that today, but I want to what I learned then, I can never unlearn. What I saw, I could never unsee. And we sat in parking lot after parking lot after parking lot outside of the hotels and motels, knowing, because you could follow along with on the phones and watching the ads being placed by these pimps for the girls that just their whole day was being raped after being raped after being raped after being raped. That was their whole day. And I wanted to go in and pull them out. Could we not help them? You know, now understanding that there are rules and that's not, you know, the police have an important job to do. But they were going in with partners. We were going in with community partners from agencies. That day, Bethesda House, Carly Church, who is a human trafficking survivor, she's working with these agencies that go in, and they're the first person. They're the first people to interact with these girls, not the police. The police were there as the follow-up. It was sort of the, hi, here's who we are, you're not in trouble, we want to help you, there are resources in the community. That's an oversimplification, but it was remarkably effective. And the Human Trafficking Unit has built relationships with all of these agencies, the Victim Services. There's so much that can be learned there. So when the government is consulting with folks like Victim Services, the Human Trafficking Coalition in Durham region, which I'm very pleased and proud to work with on a regular basis, and our local Human Trafficking Unit, there is so much that can be incorporated into the next piece of legislation, right? I'm going to read something, though, from Krista McNeil, who is the Clinical Director of Victim Services of Durham Region, and she wrote this to me after our last Human Trafficking Coalition meeting. Summary of surveys that they have done with the agency partners that work directly with human trafficking survivors. And she says, quote, primary areas of concern in Durham are lack of affordable safe housing and access to acute detox withdrawal management services. Acute mental health stabilization is also of significant concern, as our hospitals do not have the capacity or knowledge about human trafficking to support this population. At this time, Pinewood Centre remains the only service in Durham region that offers acute detox, and they have only 3 female beds for the entire region. So needless to say, it was impossible to access this service for our clients prior to the pandemic, when they had 6 beds, and this has only worsened during the pandemic. She goes on to say that we have to send clients to detox in Kingston because that's the closest availability. And that's a summary of, I was going to present some of the survey, but I think you will all find that when you're connecting with your community partners who do the heavy lifting and the caring work across communities, whether it's with human trafficking survivors, survivors of domestic violence, those communities at risk, housing. is key. Access to mental health supports is key. Detox and addiction management and support is key. And we're missing that. We've seen reductions in programming or access or challenges. We've seen it, obviously compounded by the pandemic. And I had started to say and then derailed myself, but I would have thought that what I had seen with the Human Trafficking Unit, that every hotel, every motel along the 401, and I've said this before, they weren't the seedy motels. No self-respecting businessman wants to stop at a seedy motel and have his car recognized. These are just guys on their way to and from work, on the way to the gym in the morning, on the way home to their kids, by the way. Many of them. These are hotels. These are reputable. The thing is, it has to be a place that takes cash, again, because people are protecting themselves from using a credit card and having that history. But a lot of these hotels have buy 2 nights, get the 3rd free. So a girl will get put up in there by her pimp and basically stuck there. She doesn't have a phone. She doesn't have access to leave. And I would have thought that some of that would have slowed during the pandemic, and I'm wrong. And something that I'll say specific to this bill is that currently the section that is limited to hotels, defined in the Act as containing, quote, at least 6 bedrooms or suites. Advocates who are putting a thoughtful eye on this have highlighted that Airbnb-style short-term rentals aren't captured by these powers in this bill. And we need to ensure, as we're watching the crimes move into, it moves, right? It's a moving target. It's predatory. It does not want to be found out. It will go where it can snake and sneak. So Airbnbs, as I said, it's a moving target, but this government needs to continue to work with those people who can help legislation keep up as much as we can. It's not clear why increasingly the main sites of trafficking were left out of this bill. So that's something I would flag for this government. I'm going to take this opportunity to share some of the specifics from the Durham Region's Human Trafficking Model. And this, I had said, is a, well, I didn't say it, but it's a labor of love. These agencies come together on a fairly regular basis every couple months. And we share what's going on, how we can cross-support, best practices. I join because I want to hear what the agencies are needing, right? So I can echo that when it comes to budget requests or supports and understanding, I think. So the model is in response to the alarming number of cases. Yes.
Pursuant to Standing Order 50C, I'm now required to interrupt the proceedings and announce that there have been 6.5 hours of debate on the motion for second reading of this bill. Now, this debate will be deemed, therefore, adjourned unless the Government House Leader directs the debate to continue. So I will now look to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Speaker. Pleased to have it continue, and while I have the floor, I just inform the House that there will be no night sitting today.
Thank you. There is good news. There is good news. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry, I digress. But I will now return back to the member from Oshawa to continue with your debate. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to say that the purpose of the model, we've talked about, I think, the purpose of the model. There's a need for a plan. This government's talking about the need for a strategy, but there's a need for a plan in our region and across the province that is thoughtful and addresses all of the pieces. So I'm going to just do my best not to read all of it. It's a significant read, and it absolutely is worth the time. But a plan that is survivor-informed, that is relational, a relational approach. I had started by saying that the targets and victims of this crime are broken down, that they are sought out and they are hurt on purpose, that the people who target them are trying to break them down and destroy them and tear apart their relationships, which is why, in order to rebuild those individuals and help them rebuild themselves, it needs to be a relational approach. We need the supports that are interpersonal. build trust, therapeutic techniques, all of that. Anti-racist and anti-oppression lens is key. Acknowledging the context of patriarchy and systemic racism and colonialism, and it interconnects because, again, speaking to communities that are vulnerable, speaking to strategies of destructive targeting, that has to be factored into how we guard against and how we support. Harm reduction, trauma-informed lens, client-centered approach. Those are the guiding principles behind this model. Various organizations across Durham Region have been involved and are probably involved across all of your communities. From Victim Services of Durham Region, the Durham Regional Police Services Human Trafficking Unit, everyone from OW, Children's Aid Societies, Lakeridge Health, Family Services, various homes but victim witness programs. Everybody has a role to play and has work that they can contribute. So again, and the government has done consultations, ensure that that is not just a checkbox on your list, that it is an ongoing exercise, that you are building your own relationships. And the components of this model, as we've heard today, the prosecution of traffickers, yes, that has to happen, but it, again, with some of these partnerships, helps that to be more long-lasting and breaking cycles. Youth workshops to get the word out, connect with youth. Over 5,000 youth have received human trafficking awareness training through the school system as a highlight. Community education. Parents have no idea, and I'll tell you something that I remember when the police were pointing out to me on our ride-along. That if you see a car and you watch someone get out and lock the girls in the back seat, turn on the actual, car alarm with people in the back, it's so that they can't get out. If they open that door, they set off the alarm, and then he knows, right? So just once that was pointed out, you'll start to look for things everywhere. And that's just a small thing, but it isn't, and it's right in front of you. It's right in front of parents, in front of all of us. Identification of survivors happens everywhere, but only if those organizations know what they're looking for, have the education, have the resources, right? Whether that's the service organizations, OW, ODSP, those where they have caseworkers and relationships, people need to know not just what to look for, but what to do with that information. How do you then walk with someone to an agency to support them if you don't know what that agency is? A human trafficking unit, again, with community education. Some of the success stories come from those collaborative relationships. So as laid out in this, the collaboration between Ontario Works and Victim Services have led to an understanding. A client who had been missing for a long time and was known to Victim Services, OW helped to reconnect and help forge some of those bridges. Collaboration between Lakeridge Health, OW, and Victim Services. So the hospitals and our healthcare workers treat who is in front of them. They may not see some of the symptoms and signs that require different kind of attention. There was a success story of a client who didn't have a safe place to go after her visit to the emergency room, but she was connected to a staff member at Ontario Works Human Trafficking Response Team, and then was able to get connected with resources and services. Collaboration between Ontario Works, Victim Services, Lakeridge Health, and a local backdoor mission. Again, there are so many windows and doors in our community where someone can come through, right, or reach in. And they're missed opportunities if we don't have the education, we don't have the funding, we don't have programs that are able to support. And limitations and opportunities. And this is where I'm going to circle back. I'd started out on a partisan footing, and I admit it, that I said, we need to not stop cutting things, we need to fund things. But here's why. I'm going to get back to the why. Our Children's Aid response protocol, Ontario Children's Aid does not yet have a provincially standardized code or response protocol to address child sex trafficking. Right? The recognition of human trafficking in healthcare. There's a lack of recognition of human trafficking within healthcare services and a general lack of human trafficking specific health services, not just in Durham Region, but across the province. human trafficking appropriate housing protocols. If all of the money just goes to putting a young woman in a hotel, because that's all there is, well, that's where a lot of the hurt and damage happens. So to have portable funding that allows the agencies to help them find appropriate safe housing, right? We need different and nimble flexibility that accomplishes what it's supposed to, which is to keep people safe and housed. But that's a recommendation, right? That human trafficking specific mental health and substance dependent treatment. Many survivors don't qualify for substance use treatment because they're not mentally well enough to stay in the rehab centres or programs. Who walks with them to support them? Human trafficking specific sexual health clinics, legal support. There's a notable lack of specific legal support available to survivors of human trafficking. There are very few attorneys and judges who are knowledgeable of it. And what the legal system hasn't widely recognized is that such behaviours, that they see are a result of clients' coercion by their traffickers. How are we processing? I'm out of time, Speaker. So much more to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Questions? I recognize the member from Whitby.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Oshawa for her presentation. And it's anti-human trafficking is an issue that the member from Oshawa and I have collaborated on for a number of years. We talked earlier about the consultation process involved in bringing forward this legislation. And it's involved, yes, Victim Services of Durham Region, it's involved Catholic Family Services, it's involved Safe Home, and many other agencies in the region of Durham that have been instrumental in helping to affect the anti-human trafficking strategy. And that consultation is going to continue on the implementation of this legislation, should it be passed, but also on the associated regulations as well. But there's aspects of this legislation that flow out of the consultation process, one of which is the value of lengthening restraining orders.
Speaker,
Thank you.
Does the member opposite agree?
Thank you.
It's important to lengthen restraining orders.
Thank you. Thank you. To the member from Oshawa.
Okay, so the member from Whitby, I heard him across the room, though maybe not on the record, specifically about restraining orders. Was that correct? Okay. So when I spent time with the police on the ride along, and this was now a couple years ago, seems like only yesterday because it made such an impression on your soul. They highlighted a number of different challenges, some of which were, the hotels and the rules around hotels and the registries, or the part that allows, but connected with the hotel specifically. And some of the officers actually were flagging other things that they were noticing, and we were trying to figure out what the legal or the legislative fix would be. I think anything that we're hearing from the agencies that are supporting women in the community and what is needed, I think that is the right thing, but we need to hear from the victims and what would make them feel safe and be safe, and that is what we should see in legislation going forward.
Thank you. Further questions? A member from Toronto Centre.
Thank you so much, Speaker. And I really want to thank the member from Oshawa for her presentation. I think it was incredibly well researched and eloquent, and you're very well spoken on the issue. And in fact, I remember one of the very first conversations we had right after the 2018 election when I first came into this place, and we were sitting next to each other in the chamber for the first time, and you spoke about your work around human trafficking in your riding and how passionate you were about it. And I remember that was one of the very first conversations we ever had together in this House, and it was very impactful. So I'd just like to ask you if you had any other information you'd like to share with this House on how we can ensure this legislation is the most safe for survivors, survivor-led, survivor-focused, and some of the things that you've learned locally in your riding that maybe you didn't get a chance to touch on in your full presentation.
The member from Oshawa for response.
Thank you. There's a lot that I could say, but it would be, personal and kind of my impression. What I will say is that the agencies, whether, the agencies that support women and support victims directly do it because they love it, and do it because it is so necessary. And they really do need, the funding for the programs that are yielding results, that are helping women to be housed, helping them put one foot in front of the next so that they can rebuild. You know, the member earlier had commented about 4 hours of legal support. I scoff at nothing if it doesn't exist, but I will say that there are a number of individuals who need far more in terms of whether time or whatnot. And I think that having that flexibility or the ability to provide it on an individual basis,
Response?
someone may need more than others. It's a longer journey, but ensuring that we don't lose someone once we have found them, once we had started to support them, to give them that fair shot. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? The member from Etobicoke, Lakeshore.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I just want to thank the member opposite for her comments. You know, putting an end to human trafficking will take all of us in this House, across all levels of government, across various sectors, and across the country. You know, human trafficking doesn't stop at the borders. We're all moms and dads and aunts and uncles in here, so you know, this is such an emotional topic because nobody wants to see these young kids suffer. This happens in communities like Wawa, Hamilton, Durham, Windsor, and downtown Toronto. One of the things the member opposite mentioned was about the importance of the short-term rentals, and I want to let you know that we do agree. It is the Airbnbs is a new element, and that is something that we are looking into. But given the current hotel registry and guest legislation is unavailable to capture any other type of accommodation other than hotel. So we do understand that that is an issue, and it is something that we are going to look at under regulation. So does the member opposite agree that this legislation is an important step forward to move forward along with the nature of the sector?
Thank you. To the member from Oshawa for response.
The most important step in any journey is the first one, right? And to see it in legislation, to see some of the things that have been asked for and requested, that's important. My colleagues, you know, got on the record some of the concerns or questions from different agencies that want to make sure that we are thoughtful at each step. So all of that to be factored in. But, you know, of course, I stand in this House and always have and say that I want to ensure that human trafficking is addressed, is prevented, I want to say, right, is also dealt with appropriately so that those victims, the victims don't have to become victims, but if they are, that we help and support them. You know, the member talked about the changing nature of it. Absolutely, and we have to keep up, and we have to continue to be nimble, and we have to continue to be to put money where it needs to go, whether it's expensive or not, because the cost far outweighs the expense. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? The member from University, Rosedale.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you to the member for Oshawa for a very articulate and thoughtful report on how human trafficking is affecting the region, including the region of Durham. I noticed that you were referencing a report that really looked at how human trafficking can be addressed in your region, and it comes from organizations that work on this issue on a daily basis. Are there other recommendations that you didn't have the time to raise that you'd like to raise now?
Thank you. To the member from Oshawa for a response.
Yes. Thank you. There's never enough time, is there? You know what, it was the limitations and opportunities section, and I really did just top line with a number of them, and I won't delve into those too much more, but I will say that the life skills for vulnerable youth was an important piece. That was the last one I didn't get to say. You know, when I got to, I have met a number of survivors of human trafficking, and some of them were full-time university students while being trafficked, and their friends, colleagues, their coworkers didn't know. They were picked up on the weekend, trafficked all weekend, and then taken back to school, and their lives were falling apart, but no one knew. That, you know, the life skills for vulnerable youth, to keep someone away as much as possible, to forearm them. You know, they say forewarned is forearmed. The services that are going into the school, so victim services is doing curriculum work. We need to support that. I've worked with them on you know, looking at what we already have in the curriculum and being thoughtful about that. They're developing curriculum, and every time they give a presentation, they get disclosures. We have to recognize that it's happening. We have to help.
Thank you. Further questions? The member from Mississauga Centre.
listening very intently to the member opposite and her presentation, and my question is in a similar vein as the previous member asked. You know, in our consultations, we have heard from the region of Durham. The region of Durham has been a very strong voice in the consultation process and actually gave us a lot of ideas, and specifically Carly. She's been sitting on many of our consultation tables, including in a current working group at the Ministry of Education, where we're working collaboratively to develop protocols that could be applied across our school boards so that teachers, educators, and parents know what to do once they spot those dangerous signs and symptoms of human trafficking. And so I was just wondering whether the member wanted to highlight any other things that the region of Durham is doing to combat human trafficking. Thank you.
Thank you. To the member from Oshawa for final response.
Yes, and I appreciate that she said Carly, but the thing about Carly is there are two of them. And so I'm assuming that you mean Carly Kalish, but it could be Carly Church. Carly Church is a wonderful advocate, a survivor of human trafficking, and I had the opportunity to actually be in a hotel room with her and another service worker from Bethesda House, meeting girls in the moment.
Response?
I learned a lot from her. Carly Kalish with Victim Services has been doing remarkable work. She put this model in my hand, but absolutely education has to look different across all spectrums, and we have to do it together. Thank you.
Thank you very much.